do this. Hello, my listeners. How are you all doing? I am so grateful that you are here as you are on this journey on this forgiveness series. And I want to introduce you to a special guest of mine. And I came to learn about her work a few years ago. And I had to reach out to her when I was thinking about this forgiveness series. And she is a professional licensed counselor, and she practices here in Cary, North Carolina, and she has her own practice. And her name is Sara Passey, and she works with individuals, she works with couples, and she works with families in regards to the counseling setting. And I'm just going to turn the time over to her now to allow her to tell you more about what her expertise is and how she got into the field. And for my personal benefit and curiosity, I want to know what she did her PhD on, which was a complete surprise when we were talking right before we hit the record button. So, Sara, tell us more about you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. So, you already mentioned my name is Sarah, and I finished my PhD in January of this year. I'm a big believer at any age of going back to school. I think it's just awesome to know that at any age our brains can continue to learn and grow. But I opened my own private practice about 3 years ago, and I find that your specialty tends to be the people that continue to show up at your door, and whether that is prompted, whether that's guided, whether you just find that you resonate with a certain type of person and then they tell their friends. More and more I'm being pulled towards working with adult women, usually between the ages of, I would say, 30 and 60. I know that's a big range there.
Yeah.
But what I find is that these are women that predominantly feel stuck. They have lived their lives in certain ways, and then all of a sudden it stops working. And they
Mhm.
recognize that something needs to change. They don't feel authentic anymore. They don't feel connected. And it's my favorite type of client, to be able to walk into their lives with them and figure out, okay, what can we shake up, what can we look at, how can we approach this from a different perspective. I look at counseling predominantly like pulling open a junk drawer, that
Yeah.
drawer in your kitchen that is the catch-all, that it's like, well, if I don't know where to put this, I'm just going to put it in this drawer.
Yeah.
And it's the process of pulling open that junk drawer and dumping it out and really examining it and deciding, okay, which of these things are serving me, which aren't, and what can I do with the ones that do serve me to be more productive in the way that I use them. So it's a process of reorganizing. And I had a roommate in college that said, Sarah, before there can be organization, there must be disorganization. And so it's a process of attacking the disorganization and making it work for you, and then getting rid of the stuff that doesn't serve you anymore. So, and I find I do that work a lot with women. So
Wow.
that's the audience that I really love working with.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah. I
So,
didn't answer the PhD question though, did I?
okay. Well, yeah. What did you do your PhD on?
So my PhD work was with a counselor's experience working with caregivers of autistic individuals.
Oh,
So
that's
I
interesting.
have 4 children, 2 of which are autistic. Um, and I have experienced the other side of the couch, where I have worked with counselors that just didn't really get what my experience was. And that was the predominant research from the caregiver perspective, is that they just didn't know where to go for appropriate and compassionate mental health support. And so my dissertation and my work focused on how to increase the competency, the counseling competency of counselors working with caregivers of autistic individuals. And I work a lot with parents and neurodivergent families too. So that's a
Wow.
little piece of my work.
Yeah. So, just out of curiosity, and this is just a side note before we go dive into forgiveness, um, how do you think that this study in the caregiver experience and has helped you in working with women between the ages of 30 and 60?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, like, is there a
Um,
connection there?
well, I mean, I am one of those caregivers. And so, if anything, it just brought to the surface the importance of feeling validated, feeling seen, a willingness to meet people where they are. And oftentimes we just need someone to sit in the junk with us, right? And a
Yeah.
reminder that so often we just need someone to understand and be comfortable being uncomfortable with us as we struggle. And I think that that's an important piece because, in reality, a lot of the things that we face in life can't be changed. They're unchangeable variables, right? The only thing that we can change is what our experience is with it and how we interact with it. That's what we have control of. And just being able to acknowledge that with someone, to recognize it, to be non-judgmental about them being angry about it, is just a gift that you can give someone, right?
Yeah. I love all those words that you used, that related to yourself,
Yeah.
that you just wanted to be validated, that the struggle is real,
Yeah.
that
Struggle's real,
and
man.
yeah, and to be comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, think of
Like
how
that's
often we struggle with that. I mean, you walk into
yeah,
a room, it's hot, you're immediately looking for the thermostat. It's like, no, I need to change this because I don't want to sit in a hot room.
yeah,
We are kind of conditioned to want immediate gratification. And we don't do well when something is uncomfortable, which is where a lot of avoidant behaviors come from. And it's just a good skill to learn, and it's a gift that you can give somebody else.
absolutely. Totally. And so just out of curiosity, because as you were like talking about this, I was thinking about the topic that we're going to be discussing today, which is on forgiveness as part of the
Yeah.
forgiveness series. And one of the reasons why I invited Sarah onto the podcast was because I wanted to talk about forgiveness in just in different angles, because it always seems like we talk about forgiveness at church. So it has a spiritual tone and note and flavor to it. And I'm not saying that as a wrong thing, but sometimes it's so hard to relate to forgiveness in that way. Like we feel like we should relate to it, and yet we can't, and then we don't know how to implement it, which is why I invited Sarah onto the podcast, is to talk about forgiveness from the lens of counseling,
Mm.
and from the lens of the struggle is real. And so, your honest, just this could be an opinion, honest opinion. Is forgiveness easy?
No, it's terrible.
It's terrible, right?
It's terrible, and then we feel really bad about ourselves when we aren't able to do it easily.
I
You
know,
know, it's
right?
and we feel like we're not Christian if we can't forgive. There's a reason. It is hard. It's super hard. There,
It
that's my very
is.
clinical answer for you.
I love it. That's the PhD answer. It's hard.
Yes.
Amen.
Yep. There
End
you
of
go.
story. So, how would you define forgiveness?
Okay, so what I wanted to do is give
Uh-huh.
you a clinical definition of it.
I love it.
Okay.
Let's start there.
So I pulled it up from the American Psychological Association, what their definition of forgiveness is.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to read it to you. Okay.
Okay.
It says forgiveness is not merely accepting what happened or ceasing to be angry. Rather, it involves a voluntary transformation of your feelings, attitudes, and behavior so that you are no longer dominated by resentment and can express compassion, generosity, or the like toward the person who wronged you.
Mm,
For me, the most important word in that entire passage is voluntary. So it
wow.
is a voluntary transformation. So it's something that is not just going to happen, it's a choice that
Yeah.
you have to make. You have to really lean in order for it to happen.
That's
So
so
that
good.
means that it's intentional and it's something that you have power to control. But it also means that it requires action.
That's right. And it
Yeah.
requires being uncomfortable and being in that space of resentment.
Oh,
and to recognize the resentment. Because sometimes, and I've noticed just even with myself, I don't recognize that I'm being resentful. I'm just like, I have no
well,
idea why he's doing that and he shouldn't do that.
okay, so how does resentment show up for you?
I would say resentment shows up in my internal dialogue, like
Mhm,
my narrative, which is really critical, and it comes in the form of judgment. And I think
mm,
that was one of the words in your definition. It's like I want to try and control. I want to try and judge. I'm judging. And I am saying that if the other person wasn't this way, or if you just wouldn't do it this way, then I wouldn't be feeling resentment. I wouldn't be
yeah.
feeling these feelings of
Okay, so do you
unchristlike.
recognize yes, do you recognize, though, that in that statement, you've given all the power to the other person?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
I'm basically
if they would
giving,
just change yeah, if they would just
yeah,
change how they're acting, I would be fine.
I know. And I utilize the visual, like with my people, I utilize the visual of the emotional remote control. It's like I'm just giving them my emotional remote control and say, will you just press this green button and then everything will be fine. But you keep pressing the yellow button, which is totally wrong.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I can totally relate to that. And there are times where I've noticed that I voluntarily not want to work on it. Like I
Yeah, so I
don't
see that.
want to forgive.
Yeah.
So just
So I see that with clients, definitely.
and so what would you say has been some markers of someone that doesn't want to forgive? And maybe this is just from your own personal experience or however you want to answer that question.
No, so when you're not in a place of forgiveness, so you don't wanna forgive, uh, it's doing something for you. I tend to ask that question, "Okay,
Oh.
so what is this headspace doing for you?"
Yeah.
Predominantly, it's providing protection, because if we don't forgive, then we are going to naturally maintain distance between us and that person, which is gonna
Yeah.
prevent us from getting hurt again,
Yeah.
right? So it's protective, number 1, is, one reason that we keep it around. Another reason that we keep it around is that there's a myth that if I forgive this person, and it's condoning their behavior and letting them off the hook. And, that's a myth because it's not doing that at all. What it's doing, it's keeping you from being able to move forward. It's keeping you from future connections and happiness and joy. So it's actually working against you, by
Yeah.
holding on to it. And then a third area where I feel that I see it, where you don't want to forgive, is that there's a part of you that doesn't feel like you deserve the forgiveness. You can oftentimes I can trace that back to family of origin struggles, where there is kind of this implicit narrative that's unspoken that communicates that you're not of worth. What you say or think or do isn't important. And so that sometimes that can feed into the lack of forgiveness piece because you're not worthy of it.
Yeah.
And so those are the 3 main areas that I tend to see pop up. And that works with forgiving other people or forgiving yourself. It's the same.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if
And
that answered your question.
no, that totally does. And so it seems like it's a it disconnects you from another person,
Mhm.
but it also disconnects you from your own self, like from the
Absolutely.
wholeness of who you are and who you could be showing up as. And
Right.
so then what are the implications or the impact on a person emotionally, physically, and spiritually when let's say there is this disconnect? Like what is going on, let's say emotionally? Let's start there.
Um, you mean when you're, like, emotionally disconnected from someone or distanced?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what's really interesting is that just the way that we were created, we were made to be bonding mammals, right? We
Yep.
are wired for connection. And that's one reason why the pandemic was so difficult is that we were separated.
Yeah.
And that's why we're seeing so many struggles right now. So we're wired to connect. So when we are choosing to distance ourselves from someone, we don't get to pick and choose distance, right? We are essentially also teaching ourselves to disconnect from other people as well, and we start to suspect other people. So it starts to color very neutral interactions with other people. We start to worry that, are there other people that aren't trustworthy? You
Mm,
start to question yourself and your ability to gauge the authenticity of someone else or trust yourself in a relationship. And
yeah.
so it starts to kind of like feed into all of these other areas. So we don't get to just, like I said, we don't get to just pick and choose. It's gonna start to infest other
Oh,
areas,
wow.
uh,
Oh,
and
wow.
and and work against that need for connection. It
Yeah.
keeps you from other people.
Yeah.
So
So it may seem like you might have a beef with one person, and but you're what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but let's say you have a beef with another person. It could be with your ex-spouse or soon to be ex-spouse or mother-in-law or sister or whoever. And instead of feeling the impact of that based on this one person, you're saying that you're going to have the emotional impact that's going to infiltrate all of your relationships.
I'm saying that it introduces doubt, right?
Yeah.
So probably if you've been wronged by I mean, if we're talking within the, like, a marital relationship or a partnership, you've been very vulnerable with that person and you've trusted. I mean, you wouldn't marry someone that you didn't trust, or you wouldn't be with someone initially that you didn't trust, and they've hurt
Yeah.
you deeply. So think about how that introduces a seed of doubt in these other areas,
Mm,
where now not only do you have to be aware and on alert for them, but then there's the question of, well, could this happen with this person? And so then you've added a different lens. And sometimes you start to filter interactions with other people through that. Well, what if, or is there a chance that that could have been, you know?
yeah.
And so that's where it can get kind of in dangerous waters, and that's where I see that the distancing really start to happen. What's really interesting about it is that protective piece, where we create the distance.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm gonna hold on to it because it keeps me separate. And it almost becomes like that's how I'm gonna survive. When we talk physically, there have been a number of studies that they've done on forgiveness, in regards to the brain and physical health, where it does the opposite. Living on alert and being aware and creating distance actually creates more stress. It's harder on the body. It increases blood pressure. So rather than being in survival mode and keeping yourself safe, you're actually doing more damage,
Wow.
physically. Yeah,
Oh,
and
that's so
mentally. It
interesting.
impacts cognition as well.
Wow.
So,
Okay. So
yeah.
there is like real impact, real
Oh, yeah.
biological,
Yes.
physiological, psychological impact of
Absolutely.
living in this space of resentment and not forgiving.
Yeah.
And so, what would you say to a client that recognizes this, and they're realizing, I am feeling so distant and disconnected from others, from myself. I am sensing the stress, I'm sensing the worry, and I'm sensing this growing resentment that keeps growing, and I don't know what to do
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
So, how do you begin to help this client along this path of wanting to voluntarily move through this uncomfortable part in their journey to a place
Yeah.
of greater acceptance and love?
Yeah. Well, the first step is, not a comfortable one, and that's accountability.
Mm,
Recognizing, okay, what was my role here? Uh, that's hard, and that it
yeah.
takes some time. As a therapist, for me, it takes some time for me to be able to earn the right to ask those questions. I can't come out of the gate and start that, because they already feel vulnerable, and they already feel attacked and unseen, and they're coming in defensive, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so my initial role is to build that in clinical terms is called the therapeutic alliance. So it's to build a relationship of trust, right?
Yeah.
And so that I earn the right to ask the hard questions. So after we do that, after we do that, then it's accountability. It's looking at, okay, what did I do to contribute to this? And then stay in a really, really curious headspace. I recommend this for everybody. Stay in a curious headspace so that you're able to explore what some of the motivators to your behavior were. um, think about the curious headspace is that it continues the conversation. Whereas you had mentioned earlier that you have a judgmental inner critic, you
Yeah.
probably don't have, you're not able to have extensive conversations with that inner critic because of the judgment, right?
Yeah.
As soon as judgment is cast, the conversation is over.
Yeah.
But
Totally.
if we stay in that curious headspace, then you can ask a lot of I wonder questions. I wonder where that's coming from, or I wonder what is informing that. And you're able to kind of step back and look around and take a wider lens. And so we do that first when we look at accountability. And then it's a lot of times it's a very practical conversation. We go back to my junk drawer analogy, where you look at this pile of things and it's like, okay, is this serving me? Is it worth keeping around? Do I like the results that it's giving me?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and looking at it that way, it's like, okay, so the anger might be validating, or and it's valid to feel that way, but is it productive?
Yeah.
Or is it keeping me from where I want to be? And so we start to look at things that way. And then lastly, I think that we look at, I call them the shoulds. We look at the statements that are, I should this, I shouldn't do this. We look at all of those that are external messaging, usually that come in, and we kind of pick it up and run with it as if our own, and
Yeah.
identify, okay, where are the values there, and what do I want to do with those? So it's something that kind of happens organically. It's hard to spell it all out. Um, but that's kind of where I go.
I like that. The two words that came up for me as you were describing a a general process of helping a client go through this is is validation.
Yeah,
Like they actually might have a good reason to be angry, like you were saying.
absolutely.
Like
Right.
there could be 1000% good reason for you to feel the way you're feeling, and maybe in acting the way you did, but then going back to, but is it serving you? Like I
Yeah,
feel like that's such a linchpin of a question. Is it serving you? Like you can still be angry, but
right.
what is it doing for you? What is
Well,
it
and I
not
think
doing
that
for
we
you?
exactly. I think we get caught up in some of the myths that come with forgiveness. You hear the old adage, forgive and forget.
Yeah.
Um, I prefer forgive and remember. In terms of remember what I've learned, remember how to apply what has come out of this and make different choices or be more aware moving forward.
Yeah.
Um, and again, forgiveness doesn't mean that you're condoning the other person, or the other person's choices. So I think there's a lot of myths associated with it. Um, and we just, yeah. But you're right. Number one is it is okay. There are situations that are really, really horrible and very difficult to forgive. I think that one part of that definition of forgiveness through the psychological association, that as I read it, I cringed just a little bit, was when it said forgiveness is not just about accepting. Sometimes in the beginning, it is just about accepting. When it is something that's horrific that has
Yeah.
happened to you, if we're talking like abusive behaviors or relationships, sometimes the best that we can do in terms of forgiveness is acceptance. Acceptance that this was terrible, that I'm not going to be in this situation again, and accept that there's nothing that you can do that's going to change the other person. That's not your job.
Yeah.
And that's the extent of it for you. And that doesn't mean that forgiveness won't be able to come later. But I think that in acute situations like that, the acceptance piece is enough.
Yeah. And so then do you think, and this question just came up in my mind as I was listening to you. Do you think then forgiveness is more of a journey or is it an arriving point then?
Oh, I think that it's absolutely a continuum. I don't think there's a beginning and an end. Definitely not, because you're going to go through life and you're going to experience things that change your understanding. So let's take an extreme example, because sometimes extreme examples um, help demonstrate a point. Okay,
Yeah.
so you take a child who has an interaction with their mother that they don't like, that they think, maybe she spanked him or something, or maybe she yelled or was a little bit too expressive with her emotions. And the child harbors that for a really, really long time and just can't forgive the mother for how they interacted. Fast forward, then that child, that daughter, becomes a mother and has a child
Yeah.
who is frustrating her to no end. And she's had a long day. And then she finds herself having a moment where she wants to yell. She feels like she wants to throttle that kid. We've all been in that moment where we want to just open the door and drop kick them out the door. And if anyone is
Yeah.
saying, no, not me, they're not being honest.
That's when you have to book a call with Sarah.
Yeah, and then that's an example where it's a process where that new experience where she's walked into that and maybe stood in the shoes of her mother. She has a better understanding of, not that she's condoning the behavior, but she at least understands it, right? She at least understands it. So I don't think it's an endpoint at all. I think it's a continual working process. And sometimes we're good at it. Sometimes we can think, oh, I'm totally over that. I'm healed. I'm good. And then 5 years later, something could pop up and we notice that thing resurface again. And we have to look at it again, really trying to maintain that curious headspace and wonder,
Yeah.
okay, what's going on right now that is connecting that to this?
Yeah.
And just recognizing that we are human and we are limited, and opportunities like that give us the chance to deepen our understandings of how we work, what works for us, what we need moving forward. And so when those things happen, just welcome it. Welcome it as a chance to continue to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can be hard is when something does trigger us, especially from something that happened from, that was based upon our family of origin. It can be hard to welcome that triggering.
Oh,
It
very
can be
hard.
hard to welcome these emotions that we didn't even know they were even there.
Yeah. Yeah, and so talking about it is good. What therapy does, and obviously I'm a little biased because I'm a therapist, but, but I think what therapy does is that it creates a space where you can have these discussions without judgment. The beauty of working with a therapist is that it's a one-sided relationship. So you don't have to filter and you don't have to worry about taking care of the therapist after you say what you need to say. Whereas
Yeah.
when we're talking to friends and family members, a lot of times we have to either filter or we have to worry about how that's going to land and if I have to explain myself better and am I going to hurt their feelings, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one really nice thing about being able to have those conversations. And so it increases awareness so that you understand how you fit within that system of your family of origin. So that then when those things crop up, you can almost have a like a third person conversation with it or talk yourself through it like, okay, I realized that I was just triggered by that because this happened when I was a kid. So you kind of talk yourself through it and make the connection for yourself.
Yeah.
And that's a
That's
real
so
advantage and
good.
it's a skill to be able to do that. Because there's acceptance there too. You're not judging yourself for feeling. It's like, well, I'm such a stupid head. It's such a clinical term. I'm such a stupid head. What's my problem? How come I can't move past this? And instead, and again, that's the judgmental conversation. If we
Yeah.
switch to the curious, it's, oh, well, that's interesting that I'm feeling like that right now. I wonder if this is connected to that. I'm going to have to chew on this and really keep an open mind and see what I'm noticing. Two very
Yeah.
different orientations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what I'm practicing is, when those emotions come up, like when I am triggered and emotion comes up, I want to just do a fight or flight. I mean, I am either ready to dupe the other person or run the opposite direction.
Yeah.
But I'm learning to just be mindful of what's coming up and just be present with it. Like sometimes all I can do is just breathe. I just tell
Right.
myself, just breathe. And it's
Right.
interesting because as we're talking about forgiveness, as we're talking about things that may have happened from my family of origin, there are moments even in our conversation, I was triggered and I'm just like, just breathe, just totally breathe, because this is a learning experience for me. And there's something here that I need to understand about myself.
Yeah. And the fight or flight again is rooted in those feelings of survival,
Yeah.
and it's also trying to avoid the discomfort,
Yeah.
right?
Totally.
Whereas
Absolutely.
whereas more and more studies are coming out showing that one of the most effective interventions for anxiety and for, you know, the stress is mindfulness, because it keeps you in the present. Anxiety and stress that tends to live, especially anxiety, it lives in the past or the future. And it's powerful because you can't tangibly do anything that is living in the past or living in the future. So the present is actually quite safe, right?
Yeah.
So if we can stay in the present, then we can kind of process through that, and we're safe. So that's a reason why there's so much focus on mindfulness right now, is because it's like the opposite of anxiety.
Yeah, it is. And
Yeah.
it's also me just telling myself there's it's not a problem I'm feeling this. I have a
Yeah.
human brain, I have a human body. I was given this body to feel anxiety, to feel
Oh yeah.
worry, to feel stress, to feel resentment, to feel all these feelings, and I'm just going to honor it. And
Yeah.
it is a practice. It totally is a practice. And there are still times where I'm just like, where's a piece of candy? I need a piece of candy. I need a piece of chocolate.
Just
I
one
need
just one
just
piece of candy. I'm
just
like, where's a sleeve of Oreos? I need a sleeve of Oreos.
well,
Yeah, I think
you haven't seen my pantry after Costco. I'm just like, oh, and this is so I can eat this when this happens.
oh, you
Sorry, you guys.
categorize it. On this tray, I'm going to this drawer, and then I have like my red alert drawer, the ice cream that's behind the pot roast in the freezer on the back,
How did you
okay.
know about the ice cream, the Ben and Jerry's?
Because I have 4 children.
I love it. I love it. So, in regards to mindfulness, what is your favorite mindfulness practice? What do you when you have a client that may not be practicing or they don't have a mindfulness practice, where do you suggest they begin?
Um, well, so I see mindfulness in kind of 2 different categories. I think that there is daily practice that is just kind of consistent and kind of built on itself.
Yeah.
And then there is in the moment, when you are feeling that fight or flight, what do we do to emotionally regulate? How do we emotionally regulate? So
Yeah. Totally.
um so a lot of times it's my favorite mindfulness practices, like on a daily basis, is really it's anything that allows my mind to be quiet. And when I
Mm,
say my mind quiet, it's that it's nowhere else but focused on exactly what I'm doing. So for me, that is, I like walking. I love gardening. It's just like me in the dirt and nobody else is there. I didn't realize how effective that was for me until there was one time, it was a couple years ago. I was out gardening and my best friend, my closest friend, called me. And normally I would want to talk to her no matter what. And I felt like she was intruding in my
oh.
gardening. And I'm like, wow, this is this is a space that I really go to just be with me.
Yeah.
Um, so really it's any activity that quiets your mind is some of the best mindfulness. People really like meditation. I think meditation is something that you have to practice. If you find that yours is a mind that wanders, then I would recommend a guided meditation that kind of tells you where to go and what to do. I have some clients that can do a 30-minute meditation just on their own without anything, and I could not do that. I have an ADHD brain, and I would be planning meals for next year and
I would
figuring out how to rewire the house, and that would not work. So meditation isn't my jam, but it works for a lot of people. It's a little bit of a trial and error to figure out which mindfulness exercises work for you.
Yeah.
In the moment, um, I think anything that targets your senses is fantastic for mindfulness because you have to be very aware of what you're noticing about your body, and it doesn't leave space for anything else. So, probably my favorite in the moment mindfulness or emotional regulation exercise is the good old 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I don't think I
Um,
have.
but it's just sitting down and noticing, looking around and listing in your head 5 things that you see, and then 4 things that you feel, 3 things that you hear, 2 things that you smell, and 1 thing that you taste. And you can't think of anything else other than really just honing in. And
Yeah.
if you're still struggling, then you start over and you have to find all new things. And then you were really okay. What am I smelling? Okay, no, I already listed that. No, I can't. Nope, nope. Okay, there's another taste in there somewhere. And so you're out of the anxious brain and you're just really in the moment. So really anything that hones in on your senses, it's super effective. And then, breathing is also effective too. It's good to breathe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now
Totally. Yes.
some of my clients are like, "I don't want another breathing exercise." So, I don't do that too often.
So you do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I love that. Thank you
I
for sharing that tool with us.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So then we've kind of talked about what forgiveness is
Mhm.
and when we're not in that space of forgiveness and actually when we are in the space of forgiveness. And so what is not forgiveness? Like what isn't forgiveness then?
I think avoidance is not forgiveness. So, I think that if we just write someone off, that's and just don't have contact with them anymore, that is not forgiveness. So that's where someone can say, "Oh, I'm over that. I'm just not around them anymore." But then as soon as they're around them, they'll feel the same way that they did. So avoidance is a
I can
biggie.
actually
So
relate to that. Thank you very much.
yeah, you're welcome. Well, and again, I think it's hard work because sometimes it's like, how come I have to be the bigger person? How come I'm the one that has to get over this when they're the one that did this? Right?
Yeah.
It's easy
Yes.
to introduce that dialogue. Well, you do because you're the one living your life. They are not living your life. And you want a better quality of life than you are giving yourself because you are focused on this other person.
Yeah.
So that's
And
why.
and also I think because you've been given that gift of awareness.
Yeah.
Awareness of crap. I don't want to live my life like I don't want to live my life like this. I
Yeah.
am sick and tired of feeling this way and thinking this way and being impacted this way. I mean, that is a gift of awareness.
Well, and it's you get there through acceptance and
Mhm.
being okay with screwing up. Recognizing that you're not perfect, owning that right up. I mean, I'm telling you, the secret of life is knowing that you're going to screw up and being okay with it. I mean, think about that. We were sent down to screw up. It was a guarantee, or the plan of salvation would not be what it is, and we would not have the atonement, right?
Oh my gosh, that is painful. But you're so right. And we came down here to suffer. That's
We did.
another way of saying it too.
Well, and yay, I finally suffering.
Yay! Is it too late to
The
go back now?
the other thing that's interesting is that I think that when we do suffer, have you heard the phrase like when you I take one step forward, I get knocked two steps back.
Yep.
Um, one really cool connection that my brain works in like analogies and metaphors, and just out of nowhere one day, I was thinking about suffering, I was thinking about struggle, and that, thinking about that phrase, and I thought, but what also happens when you get knocked two steps back is that you have a broader view of your scene.
Mm,
So you can see better. You
yeah.
can you can look at what were the contributing factors, and you can take that information and choose differently moving forward, or be more aware moving forward.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes, when we talk about not forgiving and we talk about maintaining that distance that's protective, we're
Yeah.
forgetting that we know more after something has happened to us than we did before. And we're
Yes.
making that protective decision based on the person that didn't know as much.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a trust piece that we need to have in ourselves that no, I've learned something. And
Yes.
because of that, I'm going to interact or choose to act differently or think differently. And so we have
I
to
love
trust
that.
ourselves as well.
And that kind of belief can be so empowering because when we do feel like we've been knocked two steps back or five steps back, then we can get, like you were saying, get curious, get the curious brain. I wonder if there's something I meant to learn in this experience, or I wonder how this person is going to reveal something that I have yet to learn
Yeah.
that will better my life
Yeah.
moving forward.
Yeah. I also believe that we're not always supposed to learn something. That sometimes, and excuse my French, sometimes things just suck.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you gave us permission to not that there are experiences that we're just not going to learn anything. I
Yeah.
love
I
that.
mean, some growing up and hearing that phrase, what are you supposed to learn? It's like, does everything have to be about learning? Can't something just be awful? Yes. Yes, it can.
I'm grateful.
So,
I'm grateful that some things can just be awful and then we
yeah.
just okay, move forward.
Yeah. There as I was thinking about our very light topic of forgiveness, um, I was thinking about all the different things that contribute that make forgiveness complex and difficult. And one predominant feeling that came out for me was grief.
Mm,
Is that when we are struggling to forgive someone, we're not only frustrated with them or hurt by them, but we are mourning a loss. Okay, we are mourning the loss of a relationship, of a friendship, of a future that we thought we were going to have, of a life with this person in it.
yeah.
And that brings so many different facets in. And we have to acknowledge that we are grieving in this. And that means that we're frustrated, we are depressed, we're angry, we're wondering if there's something that I could have done differently. I mean, these are all stages of grief, and
Yeah.
it's an important piece of this is recognizing that we're in a grief process.
So maybe when we think that it might be a forgiveness issue, which it could still be, but foundationally, it could be a grief that we need to go through and honor
Well,
ourselves
it's
with.
it's just not cut and dry. So
Yeah.
when we go and we have those absolutely lovely church lessons that talk about, you know, how Christ forgives what 7 times 7, I don't even endless, amounts of
Yeah.
forgiveness. He's a different entity than we are. Um, it's just not cut and dry. And
Yeah.
there's more to the story. There's always more to the story. And when we judge ourselves based on forgiveness that is cut and dry like that, we're really dismissing what our own experiences are, and we're invalidating our own emotional paths. So it is not a cut and dry. There's not a beginning and an end. It's continuous. It's going to pop up depending on what your life experiences are, and you address it as it comes. You
Yeah.
really do. And you handle it with empathy and compassion and love for yourself. You know, when you think about how you orient towards yourself, a good way to gauge it, if you're doing it right, is
Mhm.
to look at, would I share these feelings or these thoughts or these words with my child this way, or my best
Mhm.
friend? Would I be the
Yeah.
judgmental to them? Is that what lifts them up? Well, no, it's love and encouragement. All right,
Yeah.
well, let's try to do that for ourselves. And so, you're human, you're going to feel it, and as it continues to bubble up, you have to be accepting and just work the process again
Yeah. And again and again.
and again and again.
Yeah. And so just now, just going on to a more personal note, have you had a personal experience with forgiveness? And how did it really, oh, what is the question I want to ask you? Was it easy? Was it difficult? What did you get out of it? Or
Well,
it
it's like,
was not a
what?
lesson to be learned?
Yeah. Or did it just suck?
Or did it
um
just suck?
I was thinking, because I knew you were going to ask me that. I'm like, well, which one?
Which
It's like,
one?
I
Part
mean,
one, everyone.
yeah, part one. I know, seriously. Do you have 2 hours? Um, so I think I wanted to share two. Uh,
Okay.
the first, okay, so it was many, many, many years ago. My husband and I relocated to a new area, and I met this lovely person, and for some reason, we did not hit it off. They, I don't know how they got this perception of me, but they just did. They did not like me. They did not trust me. They said things that were really unkind to some people. And I went through the cycle of accountability. It's like, okay, what did I do? There's something that I did. Is that just really being honest with myself in terms of how I contributed. And I couldn't, I couldn't identify anything. And it turned out, years and years and years and years later, it turned out to be an individual struggle that they were having at the time, that I just ended up being the person that it was being projected on.
Got it.
Um, but it caused me to create distance between me and this person for a little bit. And like I said, this was a lovely person. And I saw all these wonderful things that this person did in the
Yeah.
community. And I decided that I didn't want to carry that anymore. I didn't want to feel like I was walking on eggshells. It wasn't ever anything that was exchanged face to face. It was like behind the scenes, which I don't have time for. I'm not a drama person.
Yeah.
Because I think we just do better when we're honest and straightforward. You probably are getting that, and as we're talking. Um, and I just decided, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to walk on eggshells. I started looking for opportunities to serve this person, to see if I could change how I was feeling. Um, and I found that I was able to find forgiveness, but it was an intentional choice, and it was done through action. Um, that doesn't not mean that I forgot. I remembered. I was aware. I think you can forgive and not trust. I think that's an important idea to remember.
I love that.
You can forgive but not trust. So I forgave, but I was aware of what this situation had entailed before, and what this person in the past had been capable of.
Yeah.
And so it tempered my engagements with them. I mean, I kept a good boundary, and that I didn't allow myself to pass, and I didn't allow them to pass. I think of boundaries as rules of engagement between yourself and someone else that doesn't jeopardize your own integrity. And so I did that, and it resolved itself, and we're on good terms now. But that it was hard, and I still have moments where I feel it, where it comes up, and in those moments, it's like, all right, is this warranted? when was the last time you ate? How did you sleep last night? How are you feeling about yourself? You know, go through my own body system checks first, and then just gathering evidence. Well, they haven't done this, they haven't done that, and so challenging it when it shows up, but also being okay that, well, of course this is going to crop up. I mean, this was really painful when it came up the first time, so it's okay. So that was one experience. Do you have any thoughts or questions on that?
No, that was
Yeah.
just so beautiful. Like I could
Okay.
sense the struggle in that
It
because
was. It
it
was.
and that sense of I have no control.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
move to a place and no, like you were saying, no verbal interactions happen. Just
Right. Right. And the
it was
only
just there.
control I had was how I oriented myself towards them. That was it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I tried to lean in to um, how I would act towards them if I didn't feel this way. And then
Yeah.
eventually the feelings shifted. My other experience of forgiveness was feeling very angry at God, actually, and the process of having to forgive God
Mm.
for a situation that happened in my family that I didn't understand the reason that it needed to happen. I still believe that there are lessons that can be learned that don't have to be learned horrifically, and really had a hard time. I'm like, I remember like when it started happening, I remember going outside and looking up and being like, really? In that moment I had, well, but he gave me my personality, so he wasn't surprised.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
and
it.
and yeah, and just not getting it at all. And I felt like this heavy curtain come down between me and him that I put there. I closed the curtain. I'm like, no, you have wronged my family, and I don't need you right now. If this is what I come to expect, then I don't need you. I'm not going to welcome that. And it was very difficult, very, very hard. And um I hit a point where I remember I was walking, and I asked myself, okay, what's better, having a life without God, or having a life with God and trusting that it could be better? Do I is my preference him in my life or him not? If I look at the whole history of my life and gather the evidence, um, what's a better scenario, even if I'm totally ticked at him right now?
Yeah.
And the better scenario was him being in my life. And my way back with that was I just started attending the temple a lot, because I felt like I could disappear in the temple and that people wouldn't be asking me how I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I could, as the closest I could get to a one-on-one with him. And the first time that I went back into the temple, I remember wondering if I was going to feel an impression. You wonder if you're going to have this amazing spiritual experience. And the message that I received in the temple when I kind of questioned, like, well, things have been rough right now. If I could put the feeling that I had into his words, it would be, yep, that was it. It was acknowledgement of the difficulty, recognition that it wasn't over, uh, and there wasn't an apology for it. It was, you signed up for this, and I trust you. I trust that you could handle it. And I didn't like that answer, but it was enough. It was enough for me to be acknowledged in that moment. Um, and then I kept going to the temple, and I felt the curtain lifting. And I just eventually decided that it wasn't productive. Valid that I felt that way towards someone that I felt wronged by, but not
Yeah.
productive, because
Yeah.
my life was better with him in it. And that was really hard, but good.
So, do you trust God then?
I do. I don't always agree with him, but I also know that that's the human part of me,
Yeah.
that doesn't understand his motivation. I don't I don't have the benefit of his perspective or his lenses, his eternal lenses. I have to take his word for it. So yes, I trust him, and the human limited part of me struggles still. And that is also on a continuum. And I think that is okay. And an area of self forgiveness that we need to recognize and be okay with.
I love that. I love how you're finding that thread of forgiveness in this story and this experience with him. And so, what does it mean to you then to lead with grace when it comes to forgiveness?
Well, how do you define grace?
That's a really good question. How does Sarah Passey define grace?
I think of grace greatly as acceptance.
Mm.
I think of grace as empathy and acceptance for what the situation is. And I don't think that there's any judgment in grace. And so I think when we're leading with grace, like leading ourselves with grace, it is recognizing that we're human, recognizing that we are enduring remarkably difficult things. I mean, remarkably difficult things. I sit across in session with people and I just sometimes what they're struggling with it just takes my breath away. Um and the other thing that I love is that regardless of what people are struggling with or what they're sharing, predominantly I feel God's love for them so much. I just it doesn't even matter what they're coming to me with is
Yeah.
how much God loves them. So leading with grace is accepting that we're going to mess up, recognizing that there is trust there on the side of God that we can handle it, though that phrase stinks. It's like I won't give you anything that you can't handle. It's like I don't want to have to handle it. And I think it's also okay to feel that way because we're
Yeah.
human and we are limited. And so I honestly I just think it's all about acceptance and and trusting, being confident that you're going to figure it out. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. We have
Yeah.
it's an
So true.
interesting intersection of psychology and religion. Is this idea of self-actualization where there's a belief that the soul or the spirit or however you define it has an innate desire to progress and improve and develop to a certain level. And we believe that through a religious lens. We're here to grow. We chose this plan, knowing all the facts. We chose the plan,
Yeah.
and I have to return to that. It's like, no, I'm going to trust that I knew what the right choice was when I had all of the facts. What's so hard here is that we do not have all of the facts,
No, we
and
don't.
we don't remember, and we have to move by faith. We have to move
Yeah.
by faith. So giving ourselves space, um, and patience, and recognizing that and being accepting. I think that is how we lead with grace. It's through acceptance.
Awesome. I love that answer. Thank you so much for sharing your beliefs, your insights, and your brilliant mind, your brilliant counseling mind. And so I will make sure that I include all the ways of having people contact you if they want to work with you.
Mhm.
And I'll have that in the show notes for anyone that is interested. And again, thank you so much, Sarah, for being on here.
Yeah, thank you
And
so much for having
I
me.
know. And I was telling Sarah, I'm like, she needs to start her own podcast, but maybe. I won't make
Oh,
you answer that
maybe.
here. All right,
I don't know.
everyone.
I don't know if me, that far reaching is healthy for the world.
Let's take a vote. Come on, everyone.
All right.
All
Sounds
right.
good.
Thank you so much for being on here. And I will talk to you all later. Bye.
All right.